Welcome to the Gospel Chariot podcast with Greg Smith. Join me for theological ramblings, thoughts, Bible classes, sermons, and an occasional guest. If you're searching for a confident relationship with God, if you're seeking clarity in your eternal purpose, you have found the right podcast. Let's open God's Word and hear His message. And may the Holy Spirit direct my words and enrich your hearing. Thank you for being here. We are doing a series of sermons that are just like one-line statements of Jesus. And this one's kind of a paraphrase because Jesus actually said it's not the well who need the doctor, but a sick. But I couldn't make that into a great title, so I just made it The Sick Need a Doctor. So although it's a paraphrase, it's an okay paraphrase. You don't have to worry about that, all right? I'm not misquoting Scripture. In the summer of 1873, a cholera epidemic struck Nashville. At that time, Nashville had about 25,000 residents. Of those 25,000 residents, about 1,000 died during that epidemic. Almost one of every 25 people died. Many people who were financially able fled the city so that they could try to get away from the epidemic. David Lipscomb lived on a farm about 10 miles outside of Nashville, but instead of staying on his farm, he came to Nashville and he went from house to house trying to help the sick. He didn't just go from house to house trying to help the sick. There were some Catholic nuns who were part of the Sisters of Mercy and the Dominican order, and he would also transport them from place to place in his horse and buggy as they tried to care for the sick. While other people were fleeing, Lipscomb was right in the middle of what was happening. In July 17th of that year, he wrote an article for the Gospel Advocate, and if you ever choose to find it, it would be, it's well worth reading. It's called Cholera and the Christian Religion. But in that, he asked a very pointed, very valid question. What would Jesus have done if he was in Nashville? Would he have fled? Or would Jesus have been trying to help the sick? After that, he wrote a pretty scathing rebuke of those who left the city, and he thanked those who stayed. But it really is an important question. What happens when we see someone who is sick? Do we help? Or do we flee? We know exactly what Jesus would have done in that situation. And we know it from the scripture we're going to look at this morning. It's not necessarily about a sick person. It's about something that's happening in Jesus' ministry. It's Matthew chapter 9. You can find this in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And this is what the scripture says. As Jesus went on from there, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at a tax collector's booth. "Follow me," he told him, and Matthew got up and followed him. And while Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house, many tax collectors and sinners came and ate with him and his disciples. And when the Pharisees saw this, they asked his disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" And on hearing this, Jesus said, "It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. But go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice, for I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners." You know, when Mark and Luke record that same instance in the life of Jesus, they have another name for Matthew. They call Matthew Levi. Now, I think that is kind of ironic. And let me explain why I think that a little bit ironic. Levites were from the tribe of Levi. The Levites were the priests. The Levites were the one who took care of the temple, and they offered the sacrifices, and they're seen as very holy men because Levites are priests. They're holy. And here we have this tax collector named Levi, and holy people, who the Levites were, would have despised tax collectors. So, because tax collectors are kind of like, they're the lowest of the low. No self-respecting rabbi would have chosen a tax collector named Levi to be a disciple. But Jesus did. Jesus did. And we read this thousands of years later, and we aren't surprised that Jesus chose Matthew because we know the rest of the story. We know that Jesus came so that everybody could find a relationship with God. We know, we kind of see the history of the church. We've read through Acts where we're going to go and evangelize in Jerusalem and Judea and to the ends of the earth. We've read those instances where Gentiles are converted to be Christians. So thousands of years later, we're not surprised that Jesus chose Matthew because we think we kind of understand Jesus' mission. But you know what? We should be surprised. For those in Jesus' day, for Jesus to stop at that tax collector's booth and call Matthew would have absolutely just blown their minds. I mean, they would have been thinking, okay, Jesus, now wait a minute. I mean, you started off with fishermen. Right? I mean, and not just, Jesus, they're not just fishermen, they're Galilean fishermen. I mean, that's bad enough. It's bad enough that you're calling Galilean fishermen who are not trained in the Torah to be disciples, but a tax collector? I mean, really, a tax collector? Nobody would have understood that. I imagine Matthew's even surprised. Now, I don't know this for sure, but I think Matthew's probably surprised when Jesus is asking about that. You ever been somewhere and somebody starts to wave and you don't know if they're waving at you or not, or if you're supposed to recognize them? And so, like, maybe you're in the grocery store and you're looking and there's somebody way across the aisle, you know, maybe somewhat on the other side of the store, and you look over there and they throw their hand up and they go like this, and you're like, and you look around to see if they're waving at you. And then you kind of look around and you don't really see anybody else that they're waving at. So then your mind starts spinning. You think, well, am I supposed to know who that person is? And I don't kind of recognize them. I wonder who that's supposed to be. And you're thinking, well, but I don't want to be rude, right? So you kind of halfway start to throw up your hand and wave. And then you notice that somebody over here is really the person they're waving at. And you just feel like a total idiot. I mean, because you don't know. And you're thinking, well, I hope nobody saw that, right? Because you don't want to do that. And I think if Matthew in that booth, I think that's probably how he reacted. Jesus looks at him and says, I want you to follow me. I think Matthew kind of looked around and said, Now, here's the thing. The tax booth's not very big, right? Going to that tax booth is not like you're going downtown somewhere like to the federal building to meet with the IRS. I mean, the tax booth is kind of a small thing. They worked in two different ways. Most of the major roads going into a city would have a tax collector. That's why when Matthew throws his party, there can be many tax collectors. So they would sit at that tax collector booth, and as people were to bring products into the town, they're supposed to tax things that are valuable. And one of the other things they would do is some merchants not wanting to pay the tax the way they're supposed to pay tax, they would hide like valuable things inside grain. So they would get taxed at the cost of grain, but maybe they have a bag of gold on the inside. So a tax collector sometimes would have a little stick, and he would poke it to make sure there's not something hidden in there. Like, none of these are going to know this, but some of you who are older than me, I bet y'all snuck people into the drive-in theater in the trunk. And that's the same kind of thing we're talking about. And so you get that going on, and so you've got that tax collector, and everybody despises him because he works for the Romans. The other way you collected tax is there were tax collectors who would just kind of collect the yearly tax. And so they would have kind of a bigger booth. It would be in the city, and maybe that's what Matthew was. I'm not really sure where he was collecting tax, but I do know this. Capernaum's not a very big city. Capernaum in Jesus' day is about 1,500 people. And I would imagine that that's considered Jesus' hometown. You know, he left Nazareth and went to Capernaum to live. And in a town of 1,500 people, and I would imagine they've probably crossed paths. Maybe Matthew has heard Jesus talking before. Maybe he's heard some of his teaching. Maybe he's heard Jesus one of those days that Jesus is in the synagogue, although he would probably have to slip in and sit at the back if he was going to get in the synagogue. Maybe he saw one of Jesus' miracles. Maybe he had just heard reports about what Jesus had done and what Jesus had taught. Maybe they had bumped into each other in the marketplace before, just kind of introduced themselves to each other. I don't have any idea how Matthew knows Jesus. I just know that he recognizes him enough that he leaves everything to follow him. And everybody else would have been surprised, but wouldn't it be great if we could see in people what God sees in people? I mean, people scratching their head thinking, why in the world would God ever chose Matthew, of all people, a tax collector? What Jesus saw in Matthew was a faithful disciple. He saw a man who would one day write the Gospel of Matthew, and thousands of years later, people would be sitting in an auditorium in Cheatham County, Tennessee, being able to read that word because of what Matthew had written down. Jesus saw a man who would make an impact on believers for thousands and thousands of years. And even if he were to try to explain that to the disciples at the time, they would have never understood it. And I think in Matthew, what we call Matthew chapter 9, as Matthew starts writing this story about Jesus down, what do you think? Don't you think he probably did it with a smile on his face? Just thinking, man, I remember when he stopped and asked me to follow. So Matthew gives a banquet for Jesus. I don't know why he gave a banquet. Maybe he just wanted all of his friends to meet Jesus. Maybe he understands Jesus is going away on a journey, and if Jesus has called him, he's going away on a journey, and he just wants to throw a party, so it's kind of like a going away party so he can see all of his friends. Maybe he's just happy, and he wants to have a party. I mean, have you ever been like that? You're just happy and you decide you want to have a party? Or maybe it's one of those major changes in life, like a graduation or a wedding or something that goes on, and you decide that you're going to have a party. The point is, he's having a party, and there are people there, and the way they're described in the text is they're tax collectors and sinners. Now, here's something that's important. They didn't just wander off the street. They were invited. It's not like, here's Jesus, and he goes over to Matthew's house to eat, and then a bunch of people that they don't want filter into the room. No, they're invited people, it seems like. It's not now. It wouldn't have been unusual for somebody to come in off the street like the Pharisees to kind of see what's going on. But that's not the impression you get here. The impression you get here is Jesus it's not like in his association with sinners here or tax collectors, it's not like he's just trying to be nice. It's not like, somebody came in and he didn't really want to talk to them, but he didn't want to be rude, so he'd talk to them anyway. It's not anything like that. I mean, have you had one of those situations, like somebody's talking to you, and it's not that you really want to talk to them, but you don't really want to be rude, so you don't really know what to do, so you talk with them anyway, and that's not what's happening here. Jesus is reclining at the table, talking and associating with people that are considered to be sinners. Now, some translations put sinners in quotation marks like, well, the Pharisees thought they were sinners, but they weren't really sinners. No, these were sinners. You don't have to have the quotation mark. He's eating with tax collectors and sinners who the Pharisees would have despised, and they're questioning him about it, but Jesus is associating with them on purpose. So they come along to the disciples and they say, why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? Now, I want you to see something that you can't see in your English translation, and I don't want to make too big of a thing out of it, but I want you to see it. In English, word order pretty much determines what we're going to say. In the Greek language, it's not word order as much as it's cases. And I don't want to get into all that, but this is what you need to know from that. If you really want to emphasize something, you put something at the beginning of the sentence, and that's kind of where the emphasis lies. When you look at this sentence, the beginning of the sentence is not, why does your teacher eat? The beginning of the sentence is, with tax collectors and sinners? Why with tax collectors and sinners does the teacher eat? The emphasis is on tax collectors and sinners. What they're concerned about is Jesus has this situation where he's associating with someone that they don't really think he ought to be associating with. Tax collectors are really obnoxious to the Pharisees, not only because they're tax collectors, but because in all their tax collecting, they also have to deal with the Gentiles. And if you deal with the Gentiles, then that makes you unclean. And you don't want to be unclean because the law says you're not supposed to be unclean. And you have all of these laws and regulations. So it just kind of really messes up everything that they want to do. And so here, Jesus he's associated with tax collectors and sinners on purpose, and they don't understand it. They can't figure it out. Why would Jesus be with that group of people if he's really a Jewish rabbi, if he's really a teacher? Because I wouldn't be around those. I'd be around people who are holy or righteous or people who keep the law, not tax collectors and sinners. So then, Jesus is going to reply. And he says, it's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. Now, here's another one of those things that's kind of interesting. Need is the first word in the sentence. The question is about need. Who needs Jesus? Who needs the doctor? You know, I don't know about you, but I don't usually go to the doctor when I'm feeling well. I don't usually get up and say, you know what, I think I felt better today than I have felt in months. I think I'll call the doc to see if I can go see the doctor. I don't call to get a ride in an ambulance to the emergency room when I'm feeling good. I just don't. Now, I do go to the doctor once a year for a checkup. That's in case I am feeling good, but for some reason I'm not supposed to be feeling good. But usually when I'm feeling good, I don't go to the doctor. Do y'all get up and go to the doctor when you're feeling great? Now, if I wake up with a sniffle or I wake up with a hurt, if I get another kidney stone, I can promise you I'm going to the doctor because I'm going to hurt. I'm going to be in pain. I am going to need some help. And so when Jesus is saying this, look, you don't go when you're healthy, you go when you're sick, when you're having some kind of pain or disease or some kind of unmanageable pain. Well, there's some wordplay in here. The word that we translate sick can also mean whole. We translate it healthy, we translate it well, we translate it whole. There's a lot of different ways you can translate it. But I want you to see the irony of that. Jesus is talking to a group of people who think that, at least in relationship to God, they are whole, they're complete. And Jesus is tongue-in-cheek telling them, now you're not really well. You're not whole. The word that we translate sick can also mean bad. But in context here, it means sick. So we're right translating it sick. But there's this like little wordplay going on. It's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. It's not the whole who need a doctor, but those who are bad. And what Jesus is really doing in his own way is just trying to help them point the finger right back at themselves. They're so concerned about the formal observance of the law that they are forgetting to see the need of the people who need God. So that's why he follows it up by saying, I desire mercy, not sacrifice. Go learn what that means. Go learn what it means when God says, I desire mercy, not sacrifice. Now, is Jesus in that saying sacrifice is not important? No, that's not what he's trying to emphasize here. He's not trying to say sacrifice in Jesus' day is unimportant. It is important. I mean, it's God's command. They're supposed to do it, right? Jesus even teaches about that. if you bring your gift to the altar and you remember your brother has something against you, you're supposed to leave your gift at the altar, go be reconciled with your brother, and then come back and offer the gift. Is Jesus telling you not to offer sacrifices? No, but he's also telling you to do it in a way that you have reconciled with your brother, that they don't have something against you. The principle here is that the Pharisees are so preoccupied with ritual purity that it's overridden the concern that they should have for those people who have a need. They're so concerned about following the rules that they've forgotten why the rules exist in the first place. When David Lipscomb went into Nashville to care for those who had cholera, it didn't matter if they were white, black, rich, poor, and it didn't matter which religion they were. It only mattered that they had a need. And what the Pharisees were missing, what sinners are Christ's mission. That's why he came in the flesh. That is why he was on the earth. That is why he was doing his ministry. The sinners were his mission. It wasn't ritual purity. It was sinners. So how are we supposed to process all of this? What are we supposed to do with it? Number one, you recognize you need a doctor. Okay, when he says that there's somebody sick, you're the somebody who's sick. Now, in Jesus, you might have been healed. You might be cured now, okay? But at one time you were sick because we were all sick. We all need a doctor. There's this guy that I met years ago. His name's Jimmy Brasher. That's what Jimmy looks like. That's what he looks like now. It's not what he looked like when I met him. And he wrote this song. I don't know if he wrote it or just sang it. It was a song, Doctor, Doctor. But I like the lines of it. If you need to look that up, I put that up there so you can find it. You can find it on Apple Music, YouTube. There's a lot of places you can find it. But here's a line, a part of the song. Doctor, doctor, can I have a talk with you? Doctor, doctor, can I have a talk? I would sing it, but it won't sound so good. Can I have a talk with you? I need a great physician. I've got a soul condition, right? That's what I want you to understand. You have a soul condition and you need a great physician. And that's what Jesus is doing. And that's what he's doing when he's eating with tax collectors and sinners. So the first thing is you go do what Jesus did. Your mission is to reach those who need Jesus. Your mission is the tax collectors and the sinners. Your mission is everyone who needs to find a relationship with God. That's people in the church, out of the church, that all kind of people, right? That's us, that's other people. And that's not like it's a different category of people. That is us. You know, when we understand that we're the tax collector sinner group, then we can really start understanding what Jesus does for us and what we need to do for others. We are the tax collectors and the sinners. So how do we do that? I don't know where I got this from. I got it years ago. I'd love to give credit to somebody, but I don't know where it came from. So if I ever find out where it comes from, I'll come back, do a second sermon and give them credit for it. It was an older writing. It was from the 1800s sometime. I did write in my notes, hey, this is from an ancient source. But he was talking about this particular verse, and I thought he had some interesting things to say. The physical man enters the company of sinners for gratification. You know what that means? It means the sinful man goes and he finds the company of those who are tax collectors and sinners because he wants to do the same thing that the tax collectors and sinners are doing. He goes into the company of sinners not because he wants to try to rescue them. He goes into their company because he wants to be like them. He goes into their company to do whatever it is that they're doing, whatever it is that they're a part of, whatever kind of sin that they're engaging in. He wants or she wants to be a part of that, so they enter that company so they can be there to be a part of that. That's not what Jesus is doing with the tax collectors and sinners. The spiritual man enters the company of sinners to do them good. To do them good. He goes into the company of sinners so that he can do something great for them, that he can introduce them to something that's better. Now, does a spiritual man have to do that cautiously? Yes. Yeah, he has to do that cautiously. Might he need to do it in groups? Possibly. There's a reason that Jesus sends them out 2 by 2, right? So maybe if you're going to be tempted too much, maybe you don't need to go down that path by yourself, but you still realize there are people there who need the message of Jesus. One of my greatest, there's a friend of mine, his name was David, and the church that David went to, they baked pies on Sunday night, and they would take the pies, and then they would take the pie out to somebody and give them a pie. Maybe it was somebody who was sick. Maybe it was somebody who was a shut-in, but somebody that they kind of knew, somebody connected to the church, and they needed a pie, so they would take a pie to them on Sunday night. They'd get together, bake pies, take pies to people. Pretty cool little ministry, right? Except one Sunday night, my friend has his pie, and he's walking down the street, and he's walking by the bar in the town going toward the place where he's supposed to be taking the pie, and he says, I bet there's some people in there who want some pie. And so instead of taking his pie where he was supposed to take it, I think, he turned and he took his pie into the bar, and he sat down and talked to the people in there about Jesus. And you know what? He probably got some reaction just like Pharisees and Sadducees, didn't he? Well, that ain't a very good place to take a pie. You know, maybe it is the best place to take a pie, not to be there to participate, but to be there to help them understand the message about Jesus. Self-righteous shuns the sinner from contempt. You know what that means? It's like what the Pharisees were doing with the tax collectors and sinners. They just don't want to be around those kind of people. You know, they're just not like me. I don't want to be associated with them. I don't like who they are. I'm going to stay away. Boy, we get the same challenge in our world, don't we? What do Christians do? Do we insulate ourselves from the rest of the world so that the rest of the world won't influence us, or do we go out into the rest of the world and influence the rest of the world? Why didn't Jesus' disciples just stay locked in the upper room? You know, at First of Acts, they're in the upper room because they're afraid. Y'all remember that? Why didn't they just stay there? Why didn't they just stay in the upper room? Because that's not the mission of Jesus. The mission of Jesus was Jerusalem, Samaria, and the ends of the earth. They can't stay in the upper room. They can't insulate themselves. We can't insulate ourselves like the Pharisees. You know, the word that we get the word Pharisee from, the core word most likely, not 100%, but most likely came from a word that meant to separate. They separated themselves from everybody else. No, we are separate because we're God's people, but we don't shun other people. And some worldly men shun sinners because of reputation. I don't want to be seen with anybody like that. I don't want to be seen like in those kind of companies. I'm afraid it'll hurt my reputation, or what my business partners think about me, or what so-and-so thinks about me, or what this other person thinks about me. And in all of that, Jesus comes along, and what he wants us to understand is sinners are our mission. Just like Lipscomb asked, what would Jesus do had he been in Nashville during the cholera outbreak? What would Jesus do if he were in our world right now, in our community? Would he be trying to insulate himself? Or would he be going out and trying to teach people how much they need relationship with God? Sometimes I'm afraid that when you read me into the story, that sometimes I'm afraid you would read me in the Pharisee category. I don't know why you're with that group. Man, why don't we just have the heart of Jesus and go out and reach people who need to be reached? Why don't we share the greatest message that can ever be shared? Why don't we be the kind of people that others might say, why are you eating with tax collectors and sinners? Because that's exactly where we're supposed to be. Or maybe you have never had that relationship with God. Maybe you've never found the forgiveness and the peace that comes through relationship of God through Jesus. Maybe that's what you're searching for.